As has already been mentioned, it's great to have Andy Mayo here tonight. Andy's a good friend of mine, and he's a singer-songwriter. He's released a number of albums. He was actually on a family holiday this week down in Cornwall, but check this out. He left his family holiday just to come and sing tonight for you guys. So he's been really sacrificial. So it's a real privilege to have Andy with us tonight. And I'm going to introduce him now and ask him to come up and sing the first song. We're going to have a number through the evening, but put your hands together and welcome him.
Great. I normally play in tube stations or prisons, so it's really nice to be playing for you guys here with a human mic stand. It doesn't happen every time. Yeah, big round of applause for the mic stand. Yeah. So this song, if you didn't hear the intro, this song is called Wedding Song. That's the brief intro. Here she comes, bright and white. Here she comes, his delight. What God has joined together, let man not separate. What God has joined together, may we celebrate. Yeah. See them now, stand together. Hear them now, say forever. What God has joined together, let man not separate. What God has joined together, may we celebrate. Yes, celebrate. Love divine, love come down. Sacrifice, Jesus Christ, love come down. Love revealed, love that heals, love come down. Love defined, love divine, love come down. Has joined together, let man not separate. What God has joined together, may we celebrate. Celebrate. Here she comes, bright and white.
Well, we've heard a story from a guy in the 21st century. We're going to hear another story now of a woman from the 1st century. And I'm going to invite Kate to come and read this account to us. And if you want to follow it along, it's actually in the white books that are on your tables, hopefully. And it's on page 63. So just pick that up. This is a segment of the Bible. And it's for one of the eyewitness accounts of the life of Jesus. And it's on page 63. And it's an encounter that Jesus has with a woman. And I'll get Kate to read it. Thank you, Kate.
Great. So I'm going to read from chapter 4, which is the big number 4, and from the little number 5. So hopefully you'll be able to pick that up. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?" For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go, call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he."
Well, I love stories, don't you? I love hearing conversations. And there we were listening in to that profound conversation by a well between this mysterious teacher in many ways and this woman who had a string of relationships. And well, this song, I wrote it about somebody who lived in Camden. I know we're miles away from that town here, but some of us might know it's kind of North London. And this woman, she lived near a tube station, Mornington Crescent. And this morning, really, she wakes up and everything that she'd put her hope in, you know, all of her dreams, they've all kind of fallen through her fingers. And it looks like there's no future anymore because of this relationship that has just finished. But as she goes out, ticking along the normal kind of day, she hears about something that is so massive that it kind of, well, it changes everything. And this is another story, and this is a story of this lady, and it's called He Says He Loves Her, but she knows better. He says he loves her, but she knows better. She can tell when she looks in his eyes. She watches through the window and sees him going. He walks under a street light. There must be something better than this. She sighs and goes back to her bed. She dreams of a man who will love her for herself, someone who'll respect and care for her. Nightmares of marriages broken, shattered, children screaming out in the night. She wakes up sweating and sees the time, panics and throws on her clothes. Out in the street, it's been raining all night. She puts up her collar to the cold. She jumps on a bus that goes splashing through puddles towards the center of town. There must be something to break the monotony of all this. Outside the market, she sees a man speaking. He's standing on a soapbox. It's all right for him, she thinks. He knows nothing about how us real people live. And he catches her eye and she stops to listen. Just for a moment, she says. And he talks of a man who was beaten and battered, left to die on a cross. and how this Jesus was a human being, yet perfect in every way. Who's he trying to kid? She decides to go, but something makes her stay. And he talks of forgiveness and purification through a God who actually loves her. He carries on talking and something seems real about the things he claims. Please take a booklet. Are you interested, ma'am? Please read it when you get home. Shopping back on the bus, the booklet tucked safely under her arm. The gentleman next to her completely ignores her as the bus stops at the end of her road. She struggles up the stairs, pushes open the door, and dumps her shopping on the side. She puts on her coffee, opens the booklet, sitting down in her tatty chair. Maybe there is a God, maybe he cares for me. What do I do if he does? The kettle's whistling, but she doesn't hear it. She's reading frantically on. For God so loved the world, he gave his only son, so whoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. Whoever believes is not condemned. She falls on her knees and starts to pray, begging God for forgiveness. Up a different woman. She's now a child of God. A new life, a clean sheet. Life has at last a purpose.
Thank you, Andy. More from Andy later. Well, we're thinking about the search of life. And if you think about it, the search that we go through in life, if we're honest, is not so much for something, is it? But for someone. Someone put it this way: it's not what you have in life that really counts, it's who you're with that really matters. And this search for love, this search for belonging and acceptance, lies really at the heart of all of our searches in different ways. Freddie Mercury, who was an incredibly successful singer, said this towards the end of his life. He said, "Success has brought me world idolization and millions of pounds, but it's prevented me from having the one thing we all need, a loving, ongoing relationship." You can have it all, but if you don't have love, you have nothing. Robbie Williams, at the end of his solo career, sang a song called Feel, and in it he said, "I just want to feel real love." There's that deep desire for love and for belonging in all of us. One person put it this way: more than we want a fast car, we want someone to go for a drive with. More than we want a nice house, we want someone to build a home with. Even our desire for designer clothes is less about the fabric and more about wanting to be liked. This search for acceptance and this search for love. And yet, what's funny, I find, is that if you look at our society and our society's attitude towards love, is we kind of oscillate between two completely different views of love. There is what I might call the romantic view of love. And if you want to see the romantic view of love expressed, just watch any Hollywood rom-com or listen to any song on the radio. And you know the kind of thing. It's basically love absolutized onto the cosmic level. It's, I will always love you. I will love you with all my heart. I will love you forever. I mean, no one sings a love song, do they, where it says, I will love you for quite a long time. Or, I love you with most of my heart. They just don't sound quite so romantic, do they? There's this sense of we want this absolute, all-encompassing love that gives us everything we want. And we feel if we just got that, then everything would be okay. But then there's the opposite end of the spectrum, isn't there? And that's what we might call the cynical view of love. The view that says, well, actually, that's just Hollywood. That's just pipe dreams. And actually, it doesn't work that way. And so, to be honest, don't get your hopes up. And maybe the cynical view becomes we've been hurt. We've been through experiences, and we know it's not what it's all cracked up to be. We know that it is just in the movies. It's not really real life. And so we become cynical, and we think, actually, although we say we'll love you forever, deep down we know we probably won't. And even though we say it'll last forever, it will probably break up. I don't know if you remember when Chris Martin and Gwyneth Paltrow split up. I think it was just a couple of years ago now. It's really sad. It was one of the more successful, it seems, celebrity relationships. But what was really sad was I was reading an article, an interview with Gwyneth Paltrow afterwards. You may remember it, where she was trying to explain away the reason for their separation. She talked about this idea, this term, conscious uncoupling. Do you remember that? And she actually said the problem is that now we're living longer than people used to live. It's really impractical to expect love to go on through, 40 or 50 years. Maybe people died a lot younger in the past, she says, and their love that could be for a lifetime, but our lifetimes are much longer. So, don't expect the love to last forever. Just get over the fact that it will probably last for quite a long time. That kind of more, maybe you would say, realistic view of love and relationships. And because maybe we get hurt, one of the things that we can do is we end up giving our love to no one. We kind of hold back. We'll give our bodies, maybe, but we won't necessarily give ourselves, because that could hurt us. C.S. Lewis, in his book, The Four Loves, talked about it this way. He said this: to love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully round with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not become broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. To love is to be vulnerable. There's this desire, isn't there, for love. I wonder which idea of love you resonate with most. Maybe all of us resonate to an extent with both. We long for one, but maybe we expect the other. Well, I want us to look at this story, and if you've got those books still, why not turn back to page 63, because we'll refer to a couple of bits of it as we go through this story that we had read to us from John's account of Jesus' life. Because this is a story of a woman who was also searching for love. We know that because of what we read in verse 18. In fact, funny story about verse 18. I heard there was a wedding a number of years ago now, and it was obviously so long ago that they would send telegrams rather than text messages. And at this particular wedding, the best man got up to give the best man speech. And then, as sometimes happens, the best man also has to read out letters from people that couldn't be there. And there was a telegram that had been sent to this particular wedding, and from another person, friend of the couple. And they'd written on the bottom of the telegram, 1 John chapter 4, verse 18, which is a lovely verse later on in the New Testament that says, perfect love casts out fear. But the best man, not being very literate with biblical references, accidentally turned up John chapter 4, verse 18, and read out to this newly married couple, you have had 5 husbands, and the one you're now with is not your husband. What you've said is quite true. Which is rather inappropriate at a wedding. But actually, it tells us exactly what was going on in this woman's life. Where was she looking for this search for satisfaction in life? She looked for it, well, seemingly in love. And you can kind of imagine her story. We're not told everything that goes on, but you can imagine what it must have been like. Here she was. She's, she got her hopes and aspirations for marriage. She got it all planned out, the church and the wedding dress and the bridesmaids. And the only problem was she was 4 years old. But she had all these kind of hopes of marriage. And eventually, later on, as she graduates from maybe the University of Samaria, she meets this guy on her course, and they fall madly in love, and they go out and do all these romantic things like camel rides through the desert and whatever they did in those places in those days. And it's wonderful, and she thinks, this is the guy, this is the one who's going to love me forever, this is the one who's going to give me everything I need. And they get married, and they have the wedding of her dreams, they have all the right dresses and in the right place, and it's wonderful. They go on honeymoon down to maybe the Red Sea, and they come back up, and they start out in life together. And for a while, it's great. But then it all goes wrong. We don't know why, but it all breaks up. Marriage is over, the divorce papers go through, and she's left really disappointed. But then, maybe a year, maybe a couple of years later, she meets another guy. And you know what it's like. She thinks, now this is why the number one didn't work. Because this, number two, is everything number one wasn't. He is so handsome, but number one, he just really wasn't. And he's so funny, and number one was just too serious. And, she kind of convinces herself that now she's met the one who really will love her and really will give her everything she always wanted. And they go on their camel rides, and they get married, and it's all wonderful until it also ends. And then she meets number three. And they get married. And then it ends. And then again. And then again. And you can imagine what it was like by the time she met guy number 6. She probably thought to herself, well, what's the point of getting married? Her romantic view of love has now changed into a much more maybe realistic or cynical view, which is, well, it's not going to last. Save ourselves the hassle. Let's just live together, and then we won't have so many complications when it doesn't work out. Now, in one sense, this woman is a million miles from us, isn't she? She lives in a different culture. She's been married 5 times. Most of us haven't been married once. And we kind of look at this woman and we can think, what has it got to do with me? But actually, okay, we haven't been married. We don't live in Samaria. But maybe we do experience or have experienced something of the hurts and the disillusionments that she experienced. Maybe we've all experienced the hopes that a relationship would bring, but then we discover that the realization is less than the expectation. We've experienced maybe the pain of broken relationships and broken dreams. Maybe we've experienced the hurt of being used by others, people's broken promises. All of us, in some degree, I'm sure, can feel something of that. Now, we don't know why her relationships ended, all 5 of them. It may have been, of course, that they all died. I did once know a woman who was married 3 times, and all her husbands died, and then she got married again. And I thought, if I was number 4, I would be thinking, gosh, what does this woman do? Sorry, shouldn't really joke about people dying. But, seriously, it may have been that. Sometimes the pain that we experience in life is no one's fault. It's just from the fact that we live in a broken world. Of course, it could have been his fault. Maybe she married 5 guys that were ultimately unfaithful, broke their promises, and cheated on her. And again, sometimes we experience hurt from other people's choices, don't we? It's not our actions, but it's other people's actions that can really hurt us. Maybe that's you. Maybe you felt that. Or maybe, of course, maybe it was her. Maybe actually she was the one that was to blame. We don't know. But perhaps when we're honest, we have to admit that sometimes it's our actions that hurt others, isn't it? And not just theirs that hurt us. We don't know why they came to an end, but I think there is a clue in the story, and that is the context of this whole conversation. You notice they're sitting by a well. They're there because this woman wants to get a drink of water. But Jesus takes this idea of a well and a spring and water and thirst, and he uses it as a metaphor of a deeper kind of thirst. Now, for us, using this idea of thirst as a metaphor is a bit lost on us if we're living in Britain, isn't it? Because to be honest, in Britain, apart from exceptional days in July when the weather gets a bit hot, we never really experience thirst, do we, in Britain? And if we do experience thirst, someone has probably given us a cup of tea long before we ever got to that point of real thirst. So, thirst is not something that is really part of our culture, but in that culture, And I've been out to the Mediterranean, to the Middle East several times, and you know what it's like when it's hot and dry and barren, that real thirst you can feel that so pervades your thoughts that you can't think about anything else. And not just that, but actually in that culture, thirst was dangerous. You'll die of thirst long before you die of hunger. And Jesus takes this metaphor of this idea of thirst, and he says, you know, just how you can be thirsty physically for water, he says all of us have this deeper thirst in our hearts. And he says to this woman, he says, well, look, if you had asked me, I would have given you living water. Now, I'm not sure what the woman thought when Jesus started talking about this. Maybe she thought, well, this is a new chat-up line, isn't it? This guy thinks he's got some water that's really going to satisfy me. Maybe that's what it was, you know. She probably experienced quite a few chat-up lines through her life. But then Jesus says, no, seriously, I'm not kind of trying to chat you up, but he says, look, I can offer you something that can quench that deeper thirst, the thirst that's in your hearts. Just look at what he says there in verse 13. He says, everyone who drinks this water, this physical water, will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. Jesus says, I can give you something that will quench that deeper thirst in your hearts. You see, all of us have a thirst. All of us long to satisfy that thirst. And we can look for it in different places. This woman, where did she look for it? As we said, she looked for it in relationships. But what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that relationships are great. But if you pin your hopes of ultimate satisfaction and ultimate life on a relationship with a guy or a girl, they will always disappoint. You will load upon them a weight of expectation that they will never be able to meet, because no matter how wonderful they are, they'll not meet that deeper need. And what if someone looks to you to give them everything that they really need? So, you know, it might sound nice, doesn't it, and romantic when someone says to you, you know, you are the reason that I live. You are the reason I get up in the morning. You're the one that puts a smile on my face. It may sound nice, but can I say that's awful, okay? That's not me being cynical as a kind of single guy just after Valentine's Day. But the reason this is awful is this. Look, if there is someone in life that is looking to you to give their life meaning and significance and satisfaction, I'm sorry, but you're going to fail them too. None of us are big enough to meet that deeper need. None of us can really offer what they need. And Jesus says, I am the one that can. See, I find it really fascinating. You know, Jesus, this religious leader, we might call him, meets this woman who is kind of living a lifestyle which is very irreligious, we might say. Doesn't walk into this situation and say to her, your problem is you're just immoral and you need to pull up your socks. In fact, you need to put some socks on and you need to sort out your life and you need to, to live a better life and you need to just be more moral. That's not what Jesus does. And he doesn't come in and condemn her and just say, how many husbands? Gosh. He doesn't condone her either, though. He doesn't say, it doesn't matter, 5, have 10, doesn't really matter by me. But what does he say? In effect, what he's saying is this. He says, you're looking for the right thing, but you're looking for it in the wrong place. He says, you're looking for love, but you're looking for it in the wrong place. You see, why is it that deep down we have this sense that there is this cosmic love, this ultimate love that can satisfy us? Because there is a love that can satisfy us. Because there is a love that can satisfy us, but it's not a love that any human being alone can give us. But Jesus says it's the love that I can give you. He says it's this love that wells up to eternal life. Now, when we hear eternal life, I guess for some of us that sounds like a bit of a turn-off, doesn't it? When we think of eternal life, we think of clouds and harps and choir practice and something very fluffy and distant. But actually, later on in the same book, in John's Gospel, Jesus says what this eternal life is. And he says this, eternal life is to know the living and true God. When he uses the word know there, he's not talking about know in the sense that you know algebra or quantum mechanics or something like that. It's not kind of just an intellectual knowledge. It's the word know is actually a word that's used in the Bible repeatedly for sexual intimacy. The kind of intimate knowledge you have with someone when you share the most intimate physical act with them. And Jesus is saying, this is what I want to offer you. Not just an intellectual knowledge about a God that exists, but an intimate love relationship with that God that satisfies our deepest desires for intimacy and love. And he says, this love, this life, this thirst-quenching water that I offer is like a spring. Now, again, we live in the West. We all have taps. We don't really understand the metaphors of spring and wells. But having, again, been out to the Middle East, it's quite interesting because most people would have got their water from wells. Now, wells are quite useful for getting water out of, apart from two things. Sometimes they run dry, don't they? And even if they don't run dry, they can be a bit murky and muddy at the bottom. But Jesus says, the life I give is not like a well, kind of this life that will run dry eventually. It's nice for a while, but then it will kind of just all turn sour. He says it's like a spring. If you go down to the Dead Sea, just by the side of the Dead Sea, there's a lovely oasis called the En Gedi Oasis. And everywhere around it is parched and dry, and it's about 45 degrees in the summer. But if you go into this oasis and go to the top, there's this spring that comes out of the rock, and it's ice cold and crystal clear. And you go up there on this hot day and you just drink out of the spring and then jump into the lake, and it's absolutely beautiful. And Jesus says, what I offer is like a spring. I offer life that will never run dry, that will never go sour. I offer a relationship that will last, that won't kind of start good and then go bad, but will start wonderful and then get better. It will well up. It's going to get better and better. It starts now in this life, and it goes on into eternity. Jesus says, that's the kind of love that I can bring. And he's going to come and sing a song about that love now.
This song is called Lavish. And it just speaks of different phrases taken from one chapter in the New Testament that describe this love that Michael is talking about. God's love, lavished on us, poured out on us. Lavish love that drives out fear. Lavish love embracing near. Lavish love, adopting love that calls you child, adopting love pure, undefiled. Lavish love, his love endures forever. His faithfulness stands for all time. Forever love untamed by years. Forever love, the life appears. Lavish love, forgiving love dies on a cross. Forgiving love might gain his loss, his loss. 'Cause his love endures forever. His faithfulness stands for all time. Yeah, his love forever, and his faithfulness stands for all time. Life birthing love, last breath, God revealing love conquers death, conquers death. 'Cause his love endures forever, and his faithfulness stands for all time. His love endures forever, and his faithfulness stands for all time. Lavish love, lavish love, lavish love.
So Jesus says to this woman, I can give you this love, this lavish love, this life that will really satisfy. But actually, if you think about it, isn't that one of the most arrogant claims that someone could ever make? I mean, how can Jesus offer that kind of claim? I mean, imagine if I was to do it tonight. I could say to any of you, I can give you kind of real life. If you have me in your life, I will satisfy you completely. You would think that guy is off his rocker. You'd be right, wouldn't you? I mean, what a massive claim to make. And yet Jesus isn't just making it to this woman in history, but he's making it to all people throughout history. How can Jesus offer that kind of life? And let me say, for two reasons. Firstly, because of who he is. Just look at the end of that passage that we had read to us. The woman says to Jesus in verse 25, she says, I know the Messiah, he who is called Christ, is coming. And when he comes, he'll tell us everything. This woman, even though she wasn't part of the Jewish nation, she was part of the Samaritan nation, still had this expectation that one day God was going to come and break into history and put what was wrong right. She had this expectation of this Messiah, this Christ figure. And she says to Jesus, well, one day when he comes, he'll give us the answers. And then listen to what Jesus says. I, who speak to you, am he. Jesus says, I'm that one. That promised one. I'm the one breaking into history. God breaking into history to offer the life that we really need. It's because of who he is that he can offer this life. And secondly, it's because of what he's done. See, the whole story revolves around this idea of thirst. This woman being physically thirsty, but having this deeper, heart-longing thirst for satisfaction. And this idea of thirst is something that crops up again later on in John's account of Jesus' life, but 15 chapters later. And it's in the account of Jesus' crucifixion. As Jesus is dying on the cross, there are 7 things that are recorded of Jesus saying as he dies on the cross. And one of them that John records is this. Jesus, as he was dying on the cross, said simply, I thirst. Now, why did Jesus say that? Well, on one level, you could say, well, that was just a physical expression of thirst. We know that crucifixion was a horrific event. And one of the horrific things about crucifixion was the terrible thirst that people would have experienced as they hung on the cross in that hot climate for hour upon hour, sometimes even days, until they finally succumbed to death. And so Jesus might have been just talking about physical thirst, but if you think about it, there were all sorts of other, possibly even bigger physical pains that Jesus was going through that he didn't mention. The crown of thorns, the nails in his hands and his feet, the near asphyxiation that he was experiencing moment by moment. Didn't mention that. But he said, I thirst. Why? Because what it seems is that as Jesus was dying on the cross, there was more than just physical pain. There were many people that experienced that. But Jesus is experiencing that deeper thirst that this woman had experienced. This longing for relationship, this brokenness. And as it were, as Jesus dying on the cross, he's taking everything that we should experience so that we can experience everything we shouldn't. We experience this thirst because of our ultimate broken relationship, not just with others, but with God, the God who made us. And yet Jesus, as he dies on the cross, experiences that brokenness, that broken relationship on our behalf. We experience the shame and the guilt of the past decisions that we might have made. And yet as Jesus dies upon the cross, he takes upon himself the shame and the guilt that we deserve. On the cross, he takes our place, experiencing our thirst, so that he can say to this woman, and so that he can say to you and to me, I can satisfy. I went thirsty so that you might never have to. I experienced shame so that you might not experience it. I took your guilt so that you might have it taken away. My relationship with the God of the universe was broken so that your relationship might be restored. It's because of what Jesus has done that he can say to this woman, I can give you something that will truly satisfy. And he says it to us as well. It's free to us, but it was costly to him. But he also says something else to this woman, doesn't he? Which sounds rather odd. Just look again at verse 16. He says to this woman, go and call your husband and come back. Now, the troubling thing about that is we also know that Jesus didn't say that to the woman because he didn't know that she hadn't got a husband. But actually, we know that Jesus did know that she hadn't got a husband. So why on earth, knowing that, does he go and commit this terrible social faux pas and ask her to do something like that? I mean, you would kind of avoid it, wouldn't you, if you knew that she was, in that kind of situation? Why does Jesus say, go and get your husband? Is he just being really cruel? Is he just trying to rub in her past mistakes? I don't think so. I think he's actually being kind. See, I think this is the point. Unless we're willing to face up to the mess, we'll never be able to experience the miracle. Unless we face up to the ways in life in which we look for satisfaction and to quench that thirst that don't satisfy, we will never really discover how amazing Jesus' offer is. And Jesus is saying, actually, I want to put my finger on the areas of your life where you've unsuccessfully tried to find that deepest longing to be satisfied. Because it's only when you admit that it can't that you'll realize that I can. Unless we're willing to face up to the problem, we'll never see the wonder of his solution. And that's quite blunt, isn't it? It's quite direct. In fact, it made this woman feel rather uncomfortable, because look at what the woman says when Jesus responded to her. Verse 19, Sir, I perceive you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. Now, you're thinking, what on earth has that got to do with their conversation that they have just had? And the answer is nothing whatsoever. You see, what this woman is doing is what we all do when we feel slightly uncomfortable in a situation or a conversation. She changes the subject. Jesus has touched a nerve, a raw nerve in her life, and she says, well, I'm going to give it back to a safe debate about religion. And actually, that's what we can all do, can't we? Maybe even tonight, as you've listened to what I've said, for some of you, maybe you're feeling a little bit agitated because you're thinking, gosh, this is a bit personal. I didn't expect this. And so we kind of come up with maybe excuses or reasons for thinking why we don't need to really think about this for ourselves. And it's interesting because Jesus answers her question, but he brings it back to the real issue. And there are lots of things that we might put up and say, well, these are reasons why I'm not really into Jesus. I'm not really religious. Maybe like that woman, your issue is, I'm not religious, or maybe I'm from a different religious background. And like Jesus said to this woman, actually, it's not about being religious at all. It's not about where you go to worship, the building you enter. It's not about buildings and rituals. It's about a relationship with the God of the universe. That's what he offers. Maybe you're thinking, well, I'm really not sure what other people would think if I started getting involved in all this Jesus stuff. It's not particularly good for your kind of coolness stakes, is it? Where's Josh? Not sure how it's gone since you've become a Christian. He's obviously still trying with the headphones. But, if you're looking for kind of to be cool, you worry about what other people will think, don't you? You think, if I enter this stuff and... But actually, the wonderful thing about this story is this. This woman starts this story terrified about what other people thought of her. Do you know why? Because she's drawing water in the middle of the day. The 6th hour, that was noon. That's not the time that people go out in the Middle East to draw water. They say mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun, plus the Samaritan woman. Why? Because she didn't want to see other people, because she knew what everyone else thought of her. And yet, when she encounters Jesus, and if you read the rest of the story, you'll find out, this discovery of Jesus and his love liberates her from the fear of other people's approval. It's brilliant. And maybe you're saying, well, what difference is it going to make in my life if I got involved in this Jesus stuff? Well, can I say this? It will make a difference. It certainly will, but for the better. Because when you come to discover his love and his life deep within, then rather than loving others in the hope that they might love you back, we can love others even if they don't, because we've already been loved. verse later in the Bible says, we can love because he first loved us. Maybe you're saying, well, I'm not really ready for this kind of stuff. I'd need to think about this for a long time. Well, it's good to think about, can I say that? And that's why the Christian Union put on a week like this, because they're saying, look, think through your questions and really ponder this stuff. But, can I say, that can also be an excuse sometimes, can't it? This woman, as far as we know, when she came out that day to go to the well to draw water, had no intentions of meeting the Messiah, had no intentions of having her life turned upside down. She just went to get some water. And yet, by the end of that day, her life was different. It's totally transformed. And we can encounter Jesus Christ just as we are, and it will transform our lives. Now, you don't have to have all your questions answered, but you do need to discover the life that he offers. Well, how would you start that? I'd love to tell you very briefly as we close, but before that, I'm going to ask Andy to sing one last song, which is a favourite of mine, and I'll hand over to him.
So what if these whispers and rumours of thirsts are actually an echo of something, as one who is there, who loves us, is calling us? I was on a beach this afternoon, as I said, when the mic wasn't working, so you might not have heard. And it was sitting on that beach a little while ago that I wrote this song. It's called Calling. There's a whisper of love that starts a story, a wind-borne rumor that's reaching to me. There's an echo of a song, a sweet melody, and it hangs on the breeze. I'm calling for you, oh, my love. I'm calling for you, oh, my love. There's a ray of light that pierces the grey and dappled refractions in dawning of day. There's a spectrum of colour and escaping ray, and it warms to crimson. I'm calling for you, oh, my love. I'm calling for you, oh, my love, my love. I'm calling for you, I'm calling for you, my love. I'm calling for you, I'm calling for you, my love. There's a vague sense of hope that pervades your heart, and it keeps you breathing in the dark. There's a tale of a purpose in which you might play a part, and your soul is dreaming. I'm calling for you, my love. I'm calling for you, oh, my love. I'm calling for you, I'm calling for you, my love. I'm calling for you, I'm calling for you, my love.
Well, if Jesus is offering not religion but relationship, you might ask the question as we finish, how would that relationship start? Well, how does any relationship start? It's a good question, isn't it? Can't say that I'm an expert on this subject. I'm still single at the age of 33. And so I have no experience of marriage, but I can say that I've watched quite a few marriages. In fact, almost all of my friends get married over the last few years. And when you go to a wedding, I'm sure we've all been to a wedding, you know how it kind of works, don't you? You're all there in the congregation and you're waiting and You know, it gets to like the time for it to start, and then the bride is fashionably late. In fact, my sister-in-law at my brother's wedding was 1 hour late. I won the bet on that one, but literally 1 hour late. But eventually, you know, the bride walks in, and everyone gets up, and everyone's looking around at the bride. She comes in, and she's looking absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. You know, the most beautiful that she's ever going to. No, she's obviously going to look beautiful every day in her life, but you know, particularly beautiful on this day. She walks down the aisle, and then there's the groom, and he's scrubbed up, not too bad, down at the front. He's actually shaved for a change. And they come down, and then the minister gets up, and he stands at them, and then he asks them questions, doesn't he? They're very simple questions. You know, he turns to the bloke and says, you know, will you take this drop-dead gorgeous girl to be your wife? And he says, I do. And then he turns to the bride and says, do you take this guy to be your husband? It's about what she said. And she amazingly, miraculously says, I will. And then he joins their hands and they get married. It's very simple, isn't it? There's a commitment from both sides. He says it, and she says it. Actually, the Bible says that the relationship we have with God is like a marriage, which involves a commitment from both sides. It's like God the Father looks at Jesus Christ and he says to Jesus, will you take this sinner that's messed up and broken, and will you love them forever? And Jesus holds out his hands on the cross and says, I will. But then God looks at us and says, will you take this, Jesus, and in response to his love him? See, a relationship takes a commitment, doesn't it, from both sides. God made his commitment to us. We've seen it ultimately expressed on the cross. And our question is, or the question to us rather is, will we respond to that commitment with our own love for him